Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of Min's Minute Modcast. Today, my special guest is Richard. Hey, Richard.
Hey, morning, Min. You well?
We're doing well. Now, we've only got a minute, so let's crack on. My first question is, what trends do you see emerging in risk advisory, particularly in areas like cyber and conduct?
Okay, so I think that the cyber one is an interesting for me because everyone talks about it and have done for a whole period of time around this being the biggest risk, the most significant risk to the organization. I think the thing that strikes me most of all is actually, whilst everyone focuses on the technical response, they're not thinking about actually what happens if we actually do respond. And if you look at desktop scenarios, has anyone stepped it through? The thing that comes through most is how much people do not know. Like if you're going to pay a ransom or consider it, how do you decide who's going to, what's the governance? And it's completely, organizations really haven't thought about actually if something happens in the middle of the night, who's going to respond and what's there. The other side of the fence on the people side, look, we've seen post-COVID and in this current period a huge rise in the number of people and culture-related incidents and issues, and it's just amazing how much behaviors really have changed and how organizations just aren't dealing with it and don't have the capacity to really consider what should be the right code of conduct, the right approach, and have it feeds through the organization.
Perfect. Now, what's one of the most impactful internal audit advisory projects that you've led, particularly when it comes to sensitive or high-profile cases?
So I think if I think about one particularly, there was a real issue where people were saying there was a real clashes between different groups and senior individuals, and everyone was saying that there was a particular individual who was, all sorts of poor and negative behaviors. And we looked at it and it sounded absolutely terrible. I mean, I went and interviewed them as well. And it was interesting because everything that they were told and they made people feel and were causing all these problems, they felt were exactly the same. So the thing we realized there is actually the organization was at fault itself. The way they'd set everything up, they'd put people against each other. So we were saying, well, you could move this person on, and it's a very UK thing, right? And if something goes wrong, somebody resigns and everything's okay. That's the opposite. It's actually, the thing you've got to look at is what do organizations put in place? What's the tone from the top? What's the culture of the organization? How do you make sure that permeates all the way through to make sure actually you're doing the right thing and setting people up to succeed?
Perfect. In your experience with fraud investigations, I'll do that one again. In your experience with fraud prevention and investigations, what's a story that stands out about handling a complex case?
So I think one thing, there's a couple of things that strike me. One is know who you're investigating. But I think there's one that really strikes me where we were doing an investigation, and if something seems like it's odd and it's not working, then actually you need to follow that through. And it was a director of finance came to me and they said, oh, we've got an individual. He's such a nice chap. He's really helpful. He's helping the police and lots of agencies with their inquiries. But he also apparently used to work for the Secret Service. So he has gaps in his CV. And we were very much like, are you sure? Because this doesn't sound... And anyway, we drilled into it. I spoke to the US Embassy at one point. They're a very serious man named Bob. And the thing that came through most of all is that there were gaps in his CV because he'd been in jail for fraud.
Oh,
and our advice at the time was you need to move this person on. You need to walk them out the door. And still they were like, we're not sure. He's such a good guy. Anyway, we were like, a few days later, they agreed. They called me and said, you're not going to believe it, because they didn't suspend him straight away. They didn't walk him out the door. He walked off with half of the IT equipment and the kit and cleared out the lockers. And so I think the lesson would be there. If someone seems like they're too good to be true and claims to work for the Secret Service, they probably don't. That'd be my general bit of advice.